Hello, welcome to Maker's Bar. I'm Akshita Shetty. Today we have CRISPR QC, which empowers scientists using CRISPR to solve the world's greatest challenges by providing the key cornerstone information and insightful fundamentals to realize the full potential of CRISPR technology. Today we have Bundy, who's the CEO of CRISPR QC, with us. Welcome, Ross.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It's great to have you as well. So, Ross, let's just get started on the questions and tell me a little bit about your early career and how you got to doing what you're doing, and how did you start this company? So, tell us how it all got started.
Yeah. So, early, I'll be honest, I didn't know much about what I wanted to do. I have a degree in history. I worked in finance, and then I moved into defense manufacturing and consumer goods manufacturing. Really just picking up different things and just trying to figure out what was the right step for me, what was the next step. And when I was in business school, I studied a little bit about venture capital and entrepreneurism. This sounds kind of interesting. Maybe I can actually give this startup thing a go. And I was fortunate that I've built a network of very diverse people. And an old colleague of mine had finished his work in physics, where it had developed these sensors in science. He said, "Hey, I want to start a business. I'd like, work with a business guy I can trust." And I said, "Hey, I can be that guy. Let's go for it." And we started our first company called Cardea Bio. That was in 2013. And that company, now 10 years going, was acquired just this year, 2023. And CRISPR QC, in many ways, is a bit of an application of the same sensor technology with another co-founder from where we got to there. So I kind of found myself building relationships, building a diverse set of skills, and then working with people who really want to do something but are looking for some of the other skills, usually scientists, but looking for some of the other skills to pair that together and take that to market. And that's how I keep building new companies.
So did you have a background in biomedical at all, or you just had a background in business?
Nope, I had a background in business, and I had done a bunch of different things: business development, market development, operations, supply chain, finance. I'd had a hand in a lot of those pieces. And so when we started building it, I said, "Well, look, you scientists as my partner, I'll trust you on the science. You trust me on the business, and we're going to make this work." And I joke that I'm more of a generalist, I would say, on the business. So I know just enough to get the business going in a lot of different verticals, and then when it goes beyond my skill sets, I hire someone to go take that vertical up or grow it. But yeah, no, I knew nothing. That was one of my biggest challenges getting into life science was I didn't know anything at all. And now I've been in it 10 years, and I seem to have developed a good reputation in it so far. So yeah.
That's amazing. Actually, so I am a little bit of a journalist myself as well. I've had I can go and pick up any industry. So it's nice to meet somebody else who has a very similar skill. And when I started, I didn't know anything about media development or anything of that sort with Maker's Bar, and now I'm like an expert in it. So this is awesome to hear that there's someone else. And I know very little about CRISPR, and I know very little about biotech. So seeing someone who knows as little as, obviously now you've been in it for 10 years, you probably know a lot more than I do. I think this is kind of refreshing as well. So tell us what your company does, and tell us what CRISPR is, because I know there was a Netflix series, and there was some education, there's some mass education around it. So tell us what your company does around CRISPR and what CRISPR is exactly, to educate my audience.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is really fascinating about biology and life science has these really very difficult hurdles technically. So sometimes some of the more interesting things don't kind of spread to the rest of the community. So what gets really exciting about CRISPR is that it's an evolved system. It's actually the immune system of bacteria that used to fight off viruses that bacteria doesn't like. As a result, what that means, though, is that it's a molecule that we found that can sift through DNA, find something that the bacteria doesn't like and remove it and let the bacteria repair it and bring it back to the DNA that it would prefer. So that's how it fights off viruses. And what was figured out was that hey, we could actually take this molecule and create the part that tunes it to specific parts of the DNA. We can create that synthetically and leverage its abilities to actually edit DNA. So now instead of cutting out parts that the bacteria doesn't want, we're gonna make this molecule cut out parts of this DNA that we don't want. And that was so exciting that it actually won the Nobel Prize for that discovery, because essentially to make it consists of two parts. There's a protein that's the engine called a Cas, and then there's a guide RNA, and that tunes it to parts of the sequence that we can synthetically produce those guide RNAs, which allows us to program that Cas molecule to find any part of a genome, remove that section, and let the cell sort of repair it back into something else. So it won the Nobel Prize in the context of we can now use this to program it to edit parts of our human DNA, such as removing genetic diseases from people's DNA, or targeting bacteria or targeting viruses. So that was about 10 years ago when that paper was published. Nobel Prize was 2019. And so that was groundbreaking, because it means that we can actually now start modifying cells to do what we want them to do, instead of doing something that maybe it shouldn't. So that's kind of the quick primer on CRISPR. Obviously, there's a lot more depth to it. There's books written about Jennifer Doudna and Amanda Charpentier, who won the Nobel Prize, and all their groundbreaking work. It is worth reading. It's a very exciting kind of story. As a result, because of this capability to essentially just program this to target parts of the DNA, we're already in clinical trials. We're already using this to target genetic diseases. And the challenge then, of course, is that CRISPR sometimes doesn't edit correctly. So now if you don't have precise control of, we're going to inject this in your body, we're going to cure a genetic disease, but if we don't have precise control, maybe it edits in the wrong place. And now you've created a problem rather than curing a problem. And there isn't a lot of in between, right? You're talking about editing people's DNA, or literally talking about changing how their body functions while you're still in it, right?
Yeah.
So that's where there's an enormous risk profile to CRISPR, and we don't yet know exactly how it works. So that's how CRISPR QC came about. Is we've got a unique biosensor, comes from my first company, Cardea. We're applying it to this application, which allows us to actually understand how a given set of chemistry will operate on any target DNA and look for what drives good and bad outcomes, so that our customers, as scientists, are empowered with the knowledge on how to make this super, super precise, so that when it only edits exactly what we want, and it takes a lot of the risk profile out, of editing, something incorrectly and causing a problem.
Got it. Understood. So, so what exactly do you provide? Do you provide like knowledge base, or just trying to understand?
So it comes out in a couple of ways, but ultimately it is about knowledge, but it is about knowledge of the customer's chemistry. Everybody designs the chemistry differently. And what happens is that even if you're going to one of the big unknown factors about CRISPR is you could take a cell from your body and take a different cell, same DNA, but a different part of your body, and it will edit differently. And we don't know why. Why does that happen? So different therapy companies are targeting different cells. There's immune responses as the CRISPR floats through your body. Does it go through your metabolic system and edit parts incorrectly? We don't want any of that. How do we understand what that is? And it's my chemistry targeting this part. So what I need to know is unique to my therapy that I'm developing. Or down the road, let's say you and I have the same genetic disease, we get the same chemistry, it works on you, it doesn't work on me. We have different DNA. So what does that do to all these factors? How do we figure out how to optimize to all these unique situations? So generally when customers come to us, it often starts as service, because we're investigating new things about whatever science they're working on, whatever the therapy is designed, whatever cells they're working on, to really help them understand new things that they were unable to just really solve before, to drive better and better results. Over time, we then roll those capabilities into their lab, paired as software and instruments, so that we're empowering their drug discovery, and later as they go to clinic, empowering them to understand how a patient's unique variables are going to come into play, and what we need to do to optimize to get a good outcome. So it is about what is it unique about their chemistry to their target DNA, which is where the sensor part comes in, because they're measuring their exact stuff. But as that data comes out, then we help them analyze it through some analytics software to really get them the answer that's going to make a good decision going forward for that patient or for the product development, whatever it is they need.
Got it. So, so okay, forgive my not knowing the space very well. I did see like in the documentary where they had CRISPR kits where you could change you could figure out how to like work around your DNA and things of that sort. So do you provide information to like individuals as well, or is it just for corporations, like big companies actually?
Right now it's to companies, because the companies really are going to understand what they're working on, the biology and the cells that they're working on, much, much more in depth than we ever will. So what we do is we give them new verticals of knowledge so that down the road, as they're deploying a therapy, they're going to be empowered with that knowledge so that when a patient comes in, they're going to take the right measurements and say, okay, what do we know about this patient? And what do we need to do to change the chemistry in order to get a good result for that patient? We might need to do different changes to get a better result for this other patient. So they're going to be empowered with those capabilities. We enable them to be able to do that.
Got it. Okay. So, so obviously starting companies and biomedical field, I mean, this field itself is actually very tough. So what like are the challenges that you have faced? And I know you have been a serial entrepreneur, so probably lesser challenges than what you
A little
initially,
bit, yeah.
little bit lesser. But what challenges are you facing right now within this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think in my early days, it certainly was, do I understand enough to be successful in life science? Like,
Yeah.
life science because it's such a technical field that getting in from other industries is very, very challenging.
Yeah.
And you really, really have to work hard to earn your reputation and your stripes. And I would say today, I've been in it, I've earned that now. There's still people who don't think I'm good enough. I get that all the time. But for the most part, I've earned my place and my reputation. With this company, what is really difficult is that the other thing that happens a lot in life science is that the technical hurdles being so high, once people solve a few things, they don't want to move off of those things. And so they get kind of used to, this is the way we do things. Well, I'm coming with a measurement technique and technology no one has ever seen before. It is brand new. The sensor itself uses nanomaterials and electronic sensors that are all brand new just in the last decade in order to do the kinds of things that we do. So I also have a big education hurdle to my customers where I can say, hey, I can go measure a bunch of things that you don't, I can measure problems you don't even know you have. What do you mean I have these problems? Well, send us your chemistry, and we show them they actually have problems they don't even see. So half the time we're also educating the market about what their problems are. And to some degree, it's good and bad in the fact that CRISPR and gene editing itself is such a new space. I mean, the Nobel Prize was back in 2019. It has exploded on the scene very, very, very fast. It has grown very rapidly. And what that means is that there's quite a lot of people who are very new to the field and quite a few number of people who are core, who have been in the field a long time and say, this is how we do things. And we've got to navigate this very disparate, different sets of knowledge in order to say, okay, guys, but there's a whole host of new ways that we can empower you to actually control this process. Right? And that would be our biggest hurdle by any stretch is the market education from both a scientific and a business perspective.
And so since you're like selling this to like bigger enterprises, right? Mm-hmm. So how easy or hard it is to get into these enterprises and say, this is a new way to do it and please use this way. You know what I mean? Because because I don't think like these are like, big corporations, right? They are not very open to newer ideas, as you already pointed out. How easy is that?
It depends. I would say that is a typical sort of stereotype, but it isn't always the case. Our first big customer was actually one of the largest pharma companies in the world. We also have government agencies that we're working with. We do have startups that we're working with too. So there's quite a variety, I would say, and for most entrepreneurs, one of the most important things to understand is the customer adoption curve. So even in big companies, there's always some people in that innovator space that you can use to vet your market and prove your way through and really help shape your offering to move into the early adopters, early market where your growth really starts happening. So one of the things you do have to do quite a bit is also my approach has always been to come with empathy, right? And by empathy meaning, while the scientists are very wedded to their ideas, on the other hand, most people became a scientist because they're technically curious. And when I come with something they've never seen before, most scientists are like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Well, if I've got a little bit of time and budget, maybe I will try that. What does that do? I'm really curious. And so by engaging their scientific curiosity, we get them much more interested to say, well, let's try and learn this. And then we show them how we can do something for themselves around their specific needs. Wow. Oh, okay. Well, okay. This is really interesting. How can I leverage this? And then our goal is to help them build processes where the speed of how quickly our data is, how comprehensive, how different it is, can enable their product development much more quickly. And big companies are actually quite open to these things. The good news, though, is that pharma, in particular, even large pharma, is in a field where there's actually quite a lot of innovation happening with small and large companies. And they are used to working with small companies. They are used to bringing in new technologies. It does happen a lot for them. So they're not totally against it. You do have to, but there is a way to approach them. You have to know the right commercial way to approach them and engage with them at an intellectual level and a curiosity level, hear their problems, which are more often organizational than technical, and see, can we unwind their organizational problems to get them to the technical benefit, that kind of thing.
Got Okay, okay, now that you've spoken about challenges, tell me like what is the most satisfying moment so far as you're educating the scientists and you're talking to them, and do they have like an aha moment when they look at your product?
Every time we've gotten a customer to try our kind of analysis, we run something, we've often not only found that we answer whatever question they have, but also show them that there's other things that they should be worried about. I think with one customer who was working on how to produce one of these reagents at scale, they accidentally sent us the exact same reagent, but was produced slightly differently, and they just mislabeled it. So we had this very weird data, and we talked to them about it, and we said, oh, well, we actually produced this differently, but the exact same thing is performing very differently. So that production method actually changed how it performed. And then we said, well, then we can actually help you figure out how to produce this better, cheaper, faster by measuring what the end performance is of every production step you do. And they're like, wow, that's actually, okay, well, that's really fascinating. And it made them really start thinking much more in depth about all these different opportunities. So that was a great moment. I would say the other simple great moment is, having to test the market with a new product, a new offering, come with something no one's ever seen. I literally have our first check from our first customer sitting here on my desk. That was also a great moment too. So showing, hey, we can sell this. It is going to work. We crossed that threshold. So that was great.
Got it. So, Ross, tell me one thing. You are in a space which is like dealing with human DNA, and the information that you give has to be accurate, right? So, tell me, how do you make sure you have some certain quality standards, right? Which quality is very important, and how do you adhere to that within your company?
Obviously, it's in our brand with QC standing for quality control. So yeah,
Yeah.
it is interesting. And one of the things that I saw coming into life science and coming from industries that were much more mature and not quite as innovative, but much more standardized at that point, was that the concept of quality is not the same definition as you find in other industries. The definition used in life science is actually very different than you see in other industries. And so to me, I took a lot of the best practices that I found in the defense manufacturing and consumer packaged goods. So those worlds, I was trained in essentially a Lean Six Sigma environment that understands how to produce things at high volume, low cost, and high quality. That's what Lean Six Sigma does. Biology, again, because of those barriers you tend to have to bring in people from other industries, what it does happen is you miss some of the best practices you get from other industries, and those tend not to be, you tend not to find them quite as often. And you find that sometimes life science can be, in some cases, decades behind other aspects of the, in the life science industry, decades behind what other industries have already done. So in my view, what we do in our space is many of the problems that you find in life science are due to people problems. And it has to do with usually someone who's a scientist working in a lab as opposed to someone who is a technician working in a lab. So scientists go become scientists and do all the hard work they do to get their PhD, to be creative, to come up with different ideas. When you're trying to produce something at volume, creativity is the wrong thing to be doing. You need very precise, consistent, methods every single time, which is more of a technician's job and is the wrong place for someone with a PhD to be. And so we've built a lot of our internal processes around, how you find, like I call our lab here where we're doing service work, it's built like a factory. It uses work cell mentalities. It has certain production flows for how we produce the data. We have technicians that follow procedures, that they're highly consistent, that everything is measured to make sure things are done. It's not atypical to what you find in virtually any factory in the world, but it's super uncommon in a biolab. And I move most of our scientists more into the discovery phase where they're focused on in their computer, looking at data, trying to understand what these things mean, coming up with the next idea, and then pushing that to technicians to actually run those ideas, keeping those scientists out of the lab, because scientists often change things. They do. They change things, and then you miss out on quality. So those kinds of lockdown, procedural, very, very boring, very non-publishable things, which is what scientists are also driven to do, are the kinds of things that make for really, really consistent results, but are not necessarily the most academically interesting. But yeah, by building it like a factory, we actually get very, very, very consistent results.
Got it. So tell me one thing, like as you already pointed out, the Nobel Prize was 2019, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a bunch of companies are experimenting, are trying to do things within this space. So what is like the innovation that you're seeing within this space? Are there a lot of companies that are coming up, small companies that are coming up and saying, "Hey, I want to do the next new thing," or just
It's all sectors. It's
okay.
all sectors. So I'll give you a couple examples of the ones that I think are some of the more interesting ones. I mean, obviously, to date, there are 75 clinical trials filed using CRISPR to do something. Most of them are about curing a genetic disease. The furthest one along is about curing sickle cell anemia, so to remove the need for constant blood transfusions. That one just entered phase 3. In phase 2, it cured 70 people. All of them. Every person now no longer needs a blood transfusion in their phase 2 trial. So now they're moving into phase 3, which is getting closer to launch. That being said, there was another company that had a sickle cell therapy. So they're editing the bone marrow cells to produce good blood cells. And they used a slightly different approach, but the first person they dosed, that person's bone marrow produces very little to no blood cells. And now they need a blood transfusion every day. So you talk about the positives and the negatives, and there's not much in between. However, we see people targeting viruses, like antiviral therapies, bacterial therapies. Can we remove some of their antibiotic resistances so that the antibiotics become more effective against these bacteria? I see people using CRISPR to remove a tumor's resistance to chemotherapy. So can the chemotherapy become more resistant? So there's cancer approaches. And while the therapy side tends to get all of the attention, the ag sector is way more interesting and dynamic right now. What I see is, so one of the things that's really fascinating is that if you're editing DNA, you're only removing a part of DNA.
Yeah.
And so many of the regulatory bodies, including the USDA, have said that gene editing within certain contexts is no different than selective breeding. So you're getting to the same
Yeah.
result, but you're engineering a result, which means no GMO for any crop used with gene editing.
Yeah.
And with, there's certain genomic context around that too. So the ag sector is moving very quickly. There's a company called Pairwise, which is saying, can we take mustard greens, which have all these great nutrients but taste terrible? Can we remove the bad taste so that people eat these? They've got all these great nutrients and now they taste good. Or there's tomatoes that have been used, one to make a protein that reduces blood pressure, another one that adds vitamin D. So those are in the research stage, but the low blood pressure one is already on the market in Japan. I know companies that are working on removing allergens from peanuts and removing gluten allergens from soy. I've met a company that's looking to edit poppy seeds so you can harvest opioids that have the painkiller properties but not the addictive properties. So, I mean, the world is almost the oyster, and we're just beginning to see the first layer of ideas that people are coming up with about how we can leverage our natural world in order to create better foods for tomorrow, not just removing diseases, but better foods, more sustainable crops. A friend of mine who's in the early discovery of CRISPR actually launched a company to edit trees to make them more resistant to climate change and have more fibrous wood so that we leave all the natural trees alone and we can farm, trees that are better for the lumber industry. I mean, it's just, there's so many things happening all of a sudden in every direction. Every time a new company comes to us, it's something new every single time. And it's a very fascinating time. There is obviously a lot of ethical concerns, so it's also a very fascinating time from an ethics perspective too.
Yeah.
But I would say what we're looking at is that if you can control this process and kind of manage the ethical side of things, then gene editing will allow us to control our entire environment. I mean, we could be looking at something that defines the 21st century, is this capability.
And what are like the massive ethical concerns right now? I mean, yes, I know a few, but what are like what according to you are
Yeah.
the biggest thing that needs to be addressed?
So there's a few things. The big one, which people can research on, was there was a scientist in China. So there's a gene that if people are missing this one gene, then they're much more resistant to HIV. So there's a scientist in China who edited to a number of human embryos to remove that gene and then had them implanted in a woman and they carried them to term, which is basically human experimentation. And so he was put in prison in China and it caused a huge uproar, big concerns, because the challenge with CRISPR is that it's also fairly easy to get started. I mean, any biolab can work with CRISPR and now edit DNA and change things. It is that simple. So that obviously has very big concerns. And obviously this guy said he did this. The bigger concern is, who do we not know who's doing this? Because he just did this in his lab and no one saw it until he came out and said that he did it. There's other things too. There's studies showing where people are, where they're using CRISPR as an injectable drug to try to edit the DNA directly in their body. Okay, well, what does that mean as these molecules move around? Does it edit other parts of their body? Does it go into the reproductive organs? Are we now creating a situation where certain edits pass on to other people? Are we engineering the species? I mean, it opens these kinds of questions
Yeah.
to be had. And we're just, because that's now possible, very quickly these conversations are starting to come up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a big area of concern. I would say a lower tier ethical concern, that is really kind of my opinion and a few others, is the prevalence of life science to focus on human medicine, which of course is really important, but a lot of times those tend to target those therapies are very expensive, and so they tend to target certain socioeconomic classes not so well. Whereas you look at the ag sector, you're talking about something that could impact food security around the world and impact billions of people. So to me, the ag sector has a tremendous humanitarian value. If you can make crops that are more pest resistant, so you need less pesticides, you get better yields for farmers, that could really change many countries around the world if farmers are able to just produce more food and be able to export more and produce more funding for themselves. It is, you could see how that has such a huger impact at a much lower socioeconomic status around the world. So, and I think that conversation is missed quite a lot as the field is still enamored of what we can do. And it's like, yeah, but here's where we should really be helping people, these people to kind of lower tier parts in the world and see what we can do to elevate them.
Yeah. So this is again out of curiosity. So say you talked about the agri sector, right?
Mhm.
And we had these are not GMOs; these are modified by CRISPR, right?
Yeah.
We have these crops. So is there enough study done as to what kind of effect does it have on as you consume these food products? What kind of uh, does it have effect on your bodies, right? I mean, it might be great. You
Yep.
are like with GMO, like you are basically um, providing food for the entire world, right, at a high level. But is there studies done enough on?
In a sense. So the good news is that the people working in genomics
Yeah,
know roughly when something evolves or when it's crossbred or when it's selectively bred, what those outcomes are and kind of what a family of DNA looks like.
yeah,
To say like I've got a species, but I can direct its genome this way or that way, and that's still fine, it's still part of that species. So a lot of the regulatory bodies, what they say is editing DNA and staying within that family
yeah,
of that particular, genotype of a plant or an animal or whatever is their definition of not GMO. If you deviate outside of that, if you're making off-target effect where you have a genomic change that would be way outside of how that plant might evolve naturally or through selective breeding, then it is GMO, and then you have created that risk. So when they say you're staying within these guidelines of what would be a normal genomic family that you'd find, then the answer is we've been doing this study for 10,000 years because almost every food we eat is selectively bred or crossbred of some sort. And so really that's the goal. What you see, as long as you stay within what those families are and the natural evolution of a particular strain of a plant or crop or an animal, then the end genomic result is no different than if you actually just selectively bred for that. It's just that instead of going through generations to get to that result, you're engineering your way to that result very, very quickly. That's how they viewed those regulatory bodies, or how they've kind of defined this, and saying, yeah, if you're within kind of what you normally see with selective breeding, then it is selective breeding. And we've been eating that for since before recorded history, so they're generally okay with that. But yeah, it's not like we're introducing like zebrafish DNA into a corn or something, and we have no idea what that does. That's GMO. That's very, very weird. We're not, you've got to go through all your bodies to do that. But this is staying at least within certain boundaries. Then you're still within the same sort of thing we've been doing for
yeah.
since the beginning of agriculture.
So as you pointed out, the Chinese scientists who modified embryos and planted it, and he said,
Mm-hmm.
and and with CRISPR, you don't know who is doing it in their little garage lab, right? Which,
Yeah.
which I think is how much is like with AI now, there's like a whole buzz about how they need to regulate it and things of that sort, right? So how much of that is being done in within this space? Like, are the government bodies like educated to because they're always like a few years late before they could
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. So in this case, we're actually working with the government on some of these things. So the FDA in the cell and gene therapy field, the FDA is always, everyone gets complaints because they're like, the FDA is really behind. Well, from the
Yeah.
FDA's perspective, everyone comes with their science and explains it differently. And the FDA is like, I don't know what any of this stuff is. Everyone says something different. So in this space, what the FDA did is they went to another government agency, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who is far and above the most technically proficient agency in the government.
Yeah.
And they said, please come up with measurements that we can build a regulatory framework around. And not just measurements, but even a set of standard language and terms so that when people say one thing, they mean one thing, so we can actually sort through all this, right?
Mm.
So we were fortunate enough to start working with NIST on one of these measurements because they are quickly coming up to speed on the field and educating themselves very, very, very fast. And NIST in particular is very good at gene editing, and their customer is the FDA to really kind of help build those frameworks. The areas of concern they had was these reagents are also new too. How are we making them? How do we know they do the same thing? If there's new DNA introduced, then what does that mean? How do we know it does the same thing? How do we know that someone's science was consistent at every step that they did? How do we know when we produce this as a drug, it does the same thing as they said they did in the science? And so that's actually where our sensor comes in, is that it can do some really unique things in this field that have never been possible before, and open up that whole area about making sure that all of the chemistry is consistent, reliable, reproducible again and again and again in a measurable way, but in a low cost way. The key to anything quality.
Yeah.
I always tell people, having worked in many forms of manufacturing, that quality is really important only when you don't have it.
Yeah.
And so people don't spend a lot of money on it. So the key to having good quality is to make sure it's comprehensive and very inexpensive. It's
Yeah.
a very low burden. And most of the measurements people do take months to get a resolution. With what we do, not only can we comprehensively look at those things, it only takes a few hours to get those answers. And so there's a very low burden for people to actually use these kinds of things and make sure you have consistent chemistry through every single step.
Got it. And then, so do they have frameworks that if you do something like this, which is unethical, you probably are going to be in jail? I mean, I'm just curious because China is very different, right? Do they have frameworks
Yeah.
around that as well in the US?
I would say we're working on that.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be one of those conversations. And, I think those kinds of frameworks happen when someone does something they shouldn't, and then people move
Yeah.
reactively very fast. So the goal is we don't do that. What I kind of hope is that we can help be part of that conversation at CRISPR QC. So one of the things is, CRISPR is very easy to get started, but it's also very easy to make it not work and get it wrong and not know that you got it wrong.
Yeah.
Where if our goal is, if you work with us, we can help you make sure you understood exactly how to get it right. You're getting started, we'll help you get it right. We'll make it way easier to do that. And that way, everyone comes to us. And then if a few people are saying, look, we're going to, build a business on editing human embryos so that people are all 6 feet tall when they get implanted in their in vitro fertilization techniques, we're going to say, well, maybe we should have an ethical discussion about that before we actually help you, figure out how to do this successfully. And, so a lot of our strategy is also, can we help validate that, again, but it's not even just with that. It's like, even people with the best intentions, it can go wrong. That's why that one therapy went wrong. There's another person who died with a CRISPR therapy for muscular dystrophy. And so how do we know that this is going to work? And would you take these chemistries and put them in your body today? I wouldn't.
No, I wouldn't.
No, exactly. So maybe you're really desperate, for people who have these really debilitating diseases, but it's frightening to think about it. So if you have someone else coming in saying, look, to the absolute best of our knowledge, these people have done everything they can to make everything look good, it brings the fear out of it a little bit for the person we're trying to help down at the end. And so we're trying to position CRISPR QC to help be that. I'm not developing any of these applications myself. I'm trying to elevate the whole field and make sure there's a marketplace of trust, that the end patients or the end users know that these pharma companies or whoever did everything the right way. And then pharma companies can also know and also know from the benefit of everybody we work with what's the best practices, how do we make sure they're doing things the right way and create a foundation of trust across the whole field, because it is needed. It's never going to become real. Given the risk profile, it's never going to become real without that trust.
Yeah, I hear you. Wow, I feel like I'm so educated now after this whole conversation, So since it's relatively new, is there a lot of what kind of money is pouring into it? Is it venture, or is it the traditional corporations funding it, or what kind of money is pouring into this industry right now?
Yeah, if you look, if you just Google search online, you'll see some of the therapeutics companies who are early in and have those therapies along have already gone public. So there's obviously public money going in. There is a fair amount of venture money going in. The areas you do not see, that you won't find out there, is that everyone has a CRISPR program, even if you're large pharma. So large pharma has some money going into this, but of course they're not going to talk about what's going on in their internal budgets. I'll tell you what is really interesting from pharma's perspective. CRISPR, so again, it's the Cas protein and it's the guide RNA. And you can go to a company and order up a guide RNA. People can produce these. A lot of labs are actually capable of producing these. And you can just say, I want to target this part of the genome, and they'll send you, a few dozen guide RNAs. You figure out which one works best for what you're doing, and you're off to the races. From a pharma company's perspective, that means that this is potentially a modular drug that could target tens of thousands of conditions. So you get one through, and then you work a guide RNA to target another part of the DNA, and it's the platform now tuned to another part of the genome, and now you got a new therapy, and you're off to trials again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. So they cannot ignore it, because it shortcuts the drug discovery process so much that it would save them billions of dollars, years and years and years and years of drug discovery work to produce therapies much, much faster, which in some ways, if we get out of the cost, some of the costs of these are very, very pricey right now. Going back to my point about the socioeconomic side, that therapy that is curing people with sickle cell anemia is around $2 million a patient, which is very unaffordable. It's kind of eye-poppingly expensive. It's like, I don't know if this is going to work at that price point. But if you think about that, if you lower the cost of drug discovery, and a lot of these are rare diseases, there's only so many populations that have certain diseases, but if you lower that cost, it starts becoming more economically beneficial to target a smaller segment of the population with a disease that could transform them. I mean, really take away something that defines their life and get them back to a normal life, right? So the economic benefits, if this is truly a modular drug and proven out to be, it could have a radical change to how therapies are even looked at. And so the big pharma companies, they're all working on it. They all have a group at least investigating this, because you simply can't ignore it. The potential is too high if it works. But they're being very careful in how they approach it. The startups have to prove that it works, so they're racing to the end. Pharma's very methodical, but they are definitely paying attention.
Yeah. So since you, at the very beginning of the conversation, you mentioned you were a generalist, right? And then you are looking at, and you hire people who are specialists, and then you basically manage them. That's kind of my approach to as well, a little bit. So, so tell me, what is like your leadership style? Like, how do you? I mean, making scientists report to you is very hard, first of all, and make them work. You laugh.
It's okay. It's not hard. Most scientists are scientists are like a lot of people, and but in particular, I'd say there's a unique kind of experience in scientists. What a lot of people are looking for is something that they can just believe in, right? Almost everybody's looking for something. I want to do something that I believe in. Very few people want a job that they're just like, I just want to punch the clock and collect a paycheck. There are those people out there, but in this field, if you went through all that hard work in grad school and all the costs and everything to get a PhD, you did it for a reason, because you want to take new science and turn it into something that's going to change the world. Every scientist has that in the back of their mind. Now, figuring out how to actually do that is really hard for a lot of scientists. They go, where are the jobs? Do I go become a professor? Oh, the odds of me becoming a professor are very low. Oh, what else do I do? Do I just go become a salesperson for another science company? That's not the most exciting thing in the world. So a lot of times, what my style has always been to say, look, I tend to be, I spend a lot more time on organizational development than I do. I always change my organization as the team sort of grows. That's why I work really well in smaller companies. Bigger companies becomes harder and harder to do that. But I try to shape roles around the people and their particular skill set, so that you can magnify where they're strong, and where they're weak, that gets handed to someone else to handle that, so that everyone's really in a position where they're realizing their strengths. And for a lot of scientists, it's actually quite exciting for them to come work at a place like what we do, because to be frank, we have a very clear mission. We have a clear purpose, and there's something that when they're working on their science, they now have that North Star of saying, if I get this little piece right, it's going to plug into this here, it's going to plug into this here, and ultimately we're going to help people edit cells reliably, safely, better. That's something I can believe in. In 10, 15 years down the road, they can look back and say, yeah, but I did that, and I'm proud of it. And so I've really tried to, that's generally how I try to do things. For example, I'm not allowed in the lab. I lean on tables and I touch things, and you're not supposed to do that. So they keep me all out of that. But I generally don't know a lot what they do at a deep level. So I listen to them, and I try to repeat back what they say to make sure I understand it, and then say, okay, well, I hired you because you know this field. What do you think is the right thing? You do that. That's great. And then my job is to make sure that I take responsibility for it. That's my role as a CEO, is that they're going to do something. If they think it's the right thing, then I say, great, I agree with you. It's the right thing. We incorporate that in the plan. If it doesn't work, that's on me. But if it does work, that's on you. And that's the thing. I get my validation if the company's successful. But if they make a mistake, that's on me because I told them go make that mistake. But if they're successful, that's on them. So I try to de-risk their ability to go try new things and come up with new ideas. And that means that they do feel empowered to bring their creativity to the forefront and come up with new ideas. And I say, well, sounds like a good idea. Let's go for it. And guide them, give them some advice on how do you measure, is that successful or not, or whatever. But then let's go for it. And I try to, and obviously I try to keep them focused on the mission, because scientists, if you don't control them, they're going to go, this is very interesting science. And it's like, yeah, okay, but we're back here on the business over here. But outside of that, I try to create enough space for them to really find, and highlight that creative reason why they became a scientist, and that's true of the people in marketing for me, and it's true of the people even in operations. They have very different reasons for why they do what they do. But if I learn those reasons, and then I can help craft that role to make sure they're headed in the direction they want to go, and as long as their steps are aligned with the business goals, then I can step back if they're doing what they need to do.
Yeah. Got it. I love that approach, actually. I mean, letting people de-risking so that they can actually, and it enhances their creativity. So, so since you have started like multiple companies, you're a serial entrepreneur, and you are now doing this company as well, right? So, you must have had adversity and doubt many times, and you might have books, mentors that help you out. So what is it that you turn to, or was there a book that deeply affected you, or was there a mentor who kind of helped you get here? How did you stay through all of this?
I've had a few people that I lean on from time to time. I'm not a big book reader. It turns out I might have ADHD, so I'm not a big book reader. I read different things, I do different things, but what I will say too is, being an entrepreneur is it is not a job. It is not a career. It is a life. I mean, it embodies every aspect of your life 100%.
Yeah.
So for me, I would say there's really two people who have been, mentor is a good word, but also just one of those biggest influencers. And actually, let me answer your first question too, about adversity or doubt or anything like that.
Yeah.
I've been doing this now over 10 years with my first company, now my second company. I have doubts every single day. Every single day. And every entrepreneur who tells you that they don't have doubts, they might fail. I mean, I would hesitate that they're a real entrepreneur if they don't have doubts.
Yeah.
That is part and parcel of this whole thing. You're trying something no one's ever done.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you know it's going to work? You don't, but you're going to try anyways. But yeah, I've had plenty of times where I have sleepless nights. I'm like, how am I going to cover this, or how am I going to do that, or and to that point, one of the biggest people that has been one of the biggest supporters for me, honestly, is my wife. Angela.
Yeah.
She is. We were engaged, and I told her, hey, I'm going to quit my job and start this startup with my friend. And she's like, sure, go for it. You probably got this. You can make this work. Here we are, 10 years and starting to work finally. But she's always been able to make sure we had good food on the table. We had a good steady life. We kept our budgets, our family budgets really affordable. I talked to her about a lot of things. She understands parts of it. Not every spouse can. But for the most part, having a life outside of being an entrepreneur as a way to kind of step away from it for a minute so that I come back refreshed without my doubts are really is really, really critical, because it is hard to put it down. And in that sense, having the right kind of partner in your life is really, really key. It doesn't have to be a spouse. It could be a parent, it could be a sibling, it could just be a friend.
Yeah.
But I think that's really key. I was also fortunate enough to meet someone very randomly who stayed with me when we were renting our apartment on Airbnb, I got to know as an entrepreneur, and he's in a totally different field, but he'd been an entrepreneur and he'd been through those things. And I'd call him up, and he's a British guy named Freddie, and he's got the Queen's English, so it always kind of calms me down a little bit to listen when I talk to him. And but whenever I have some sort of doubt, I call him up. He's like, "I'm putting down my job. What is it? What do you need?" And I talk to him, and he just talked me right back up and said, "Okay, all right, I'm doing okay. I'm all right. It's okay." And that being said, the doubt side of things, I mean, the reality is if you're in that doubt phase for such a long time, and honestly, you never really leave it, it starts becoming one of these sort of recurring sort of trauma events. So the other person I see is a therapist, and I've been seeing a therapist now going on 5-6 years every month.
Okay, good for you.
And I mean, any entrepreneur who's not seen a therapist needs to start. We're all a little bit crazy for doing what we do. And it is a good way for just being like, I got to unload a bunch of garbage. Like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's happening here. And she's like, great, I hear you, but you're doing these things. Find the joy in these opportunities. I'm like, you're right. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it is a mental challenge. Any real or experienced entrepreneur will tell people that mental health is one of the most important things about being an entrepreneur and taking care of those things. And finding the right people who can help bolster that mental health is going to give you that break that you need to then step back and face the next challenge. Right?
Yeah. I've been there. 2019, I had a time where I felt like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm successful in this and that. And I was like, I'm not sure like if I'm doing the right thing. So I've been there. I totally.
Yeah. It is so critical. It is such a big part of the life that you just got to acknowledge it.
Yeah, you got to acknowledge it. And sometimes you're lucky that you have a good family. Sometimes you might not even have a family which supports you for everything that you do. And then you need to find your tribe somewhere else who's going to support you and who's going to be there for you.
100%. Tribe is the right word. A lot of entrepreneurs or what people aspiring to be entrepreneurs, they see Elon Musk, they see Jeff Bezos, they see, Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, and they're like, I want to be those guys. Nobody wants to be those guys.
Nobody wants to be, nobody wants to be those guys, trust me.
That is a persona they craft for what goes out in the media, but there is a real person behind that. And they struggle and they deal with things, and many of them have dealt with it by becoming people that you probably wouldn't want to invite over to your house. I'm just going to be honest. But also those people survive because they have a network of people that are behind them that they lean on very heavily in order for them to be who they become. And you need that tribe one way or another. You need it.
Yeah, totally agree. Ross, I cannot agree with that statement more. I always tell this to friends who are like, who are not entrepreneurs, and I tell them that it is not easy to be an entrepreneur, and I would not wish it on my child, for sure.
No, yeah, that's. I was looking at your questions too about advice for other entrepreneurs, and I get that a lot because I've been through UCSD and San Diego State, and I know their entrepreneur programs. The first thing I tell them is don't do it. Don't do it. Not everybody's cut out to do it. And if you still want to, I'll tell you why I said don't do it. If you still want to after that, okay, then but just know what it is. It is tough.
It is very tough.
And it's very rewarding, but it's very, very tough.
Yeah. And it's very interesting that you said that most of those people have become something which they didn't want to probably become at all, and you will not call them for dinner to your home because it just doesn't work. Yeah, I totally hear you as I'm evolving as well.
Yeah.
It's great talking to you, and I am sorry for the little technical difficulties we have had, but I really, really enjoyed. I felt like I've known you for a long time or something of that sort.
No, I appreciate it. This is a great program. I was looking at some of your other videos. I love them. So this was great.
Thank you. Yeah. So this was really, really interesting. And if I live up in the Silicon Valley, and if you are ever in this area, let me know. Hit me up. And my best friend lives in San Diego, so I visit San Diego. I would definitely love to meet you sometime.
Well, let me know. Yeah, we'll grab a coffee or something. So commiserate about being entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I totally hear you. All right, perfect. It was thank you for coming over. It was wonderful hearing and learning a lot from you actually today, and I'm a little bit more educated, I would say, about
I appreciate it. Well, thank you so much. It was really, really great experience. Thank you.
Thank you.